Over the weekend, law enforcement joined protesters at a Black Lives Matter rally here in Jamestown where they discussed police reforms in a peaceful, candid conversation. Joining us on the show to talk more about what we saw was Chautauqua County Sheriff Jim Quattrone. Sheriff, great to have you here today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Justin, for having me.
First off, sir, I want to ask what drew you to the protest there on Sunday?
Uh, we had heard about the protest. I had reached out to Shalom the night before, and then one of our deputies had asked permission to put a post on our Facebook, and I got an invite from Justin Hubbard to join them down there, and so we decided to go down. And the chief, I contacted the chief. Snelling's on the way, and he was on his way already, also. So. So it wasn't a pre-planned, but it was an invite, and we thought it was important for us to be there.
Yes, the Mayor Sundquist, Chief Snellings, and yourself were there among some of the other law enforcement from the area. And speaking with the community for what seemed to be around an hour, what were some of the things that were addressed with residents and law enforcement?
Well, I think more importantly was the conversation after that hour. Was able to stick around the park until about 3:15. Had some great conversations with different individuals and residents, non-residents, and really to learn more about their perspective. Some of the perspectives. It's easy for us to try to get an understanding, or say we're trying to get an understanding, but to hear what somebody is truly feeling and the emotions that they're going through. Um, One gentleman, I don't think he would mind. I always say I had a great conversation with Ron Graham, and Ron just shared some really great facts with me and information with me that enlightened me to some of the issues that are going on.
What was the biggest thing that you took away from having that dialogue there on Sunday? It seems like you spent a lot of time hearing, giving feedback. What was the big thing that you took home with you?
I think the big thing is communication, and the communication is hearing from each other what is needed to see this justice that is so much needed, and I'm hoping a recognition that the bigger problem is it goes beyond the incident that happened in Minnesota, but it goes for many years and across the spectrum. That this is going to be a long process. It's not a sprint, but it's going to be a marathon, and we have to continue the dialogue and finding out how we can do a better job in reaching out to the community. One of the big things was the lack of minority representation in law enforcement, at least in Chautauqua County and probably across the nation. And quite honestly, as I left there, I was beginning to wonder why any young person would want to be a police officer, with some of the distrust that was expressed there. But this is going to be a larger recruiting effort amongst law enforcement and the community to try to get our young people interested, to find out what they have to do to get into law enforcement, and that's what we want to continue to focus on.
Is that a hard thing for you and your deputies to see? Maybe not so much here locally. I'd imagine having the dialogue. I know I've talked to a lot of people who are very proud to see that, but nationally, we see all this violence between police and law enforcement who are working to keep the peace. Do you think that as a local law enforcement official, that does hinder people who say, I'm interested in becoming a police officer, but I don't know if that's something I want to do because of the stereotype that surrounds them?
Absolutely. We've seen over the years, and most recently, our academy attendance has been drastically reduced. And for Chautauqua County, I believe we had last year's academy only 9 people that from Chautauqua County that attended the academy, and so we're trying to overall boost those numbers, and in trying to work with our community and hopefully get some minority members that would be willing to attend the academy and have an interest in law enforcement. We have a process in New York State where to be hired in law enforcement, they have to take a civil service test. So we are somewhat limited by that, but I think that's where one of the areas is to do some education in the schools, how to take the test and what the requirements are to take it.
Now, on the point of those riots here nationwide that we see, why do you think that it comes to such a tension, and we see these people destroy their communities? Why do you think we see that?
I think there's a lot of built up anger with the process and the system, and it's difficult for me to see it, but it's also difficult for me to fully understand, and that's why it's so important that we listen to our community members, such as the opportunity we had down at the protest at Del Park. I had shared with somebody on Facebook. I saw in Niagara Falls, I think it was the mayor was claiming that the protest they had should have been an example for the nation and how to do a protest and get your points across with nonviolence. But I truly believe what we saw in Jamestown at Del Park was a great opportunity for many people to see we can have peaceful protests and continue. The problem is we have a start of a dialogue. We need to continue that dialogue, but then move beyond that and get into action. And I know, knowing some of the people that I talked to down there and that were there, I believe they will hold us to that. And that's okay. They should be holding us to that. Likewise, I think we have to do it both ways. Back in 2007, I had an opportunity to meet with an organization where they shared their distrust and displeasure with law enforcement. And after about 45 minutes of having them let us know what we didn't know about their population, it was really discovered to me and pointed out is they needed to also understand where we were coming from, and kind of going back and forth. And it has started the dialogue that has continued, for the last 13 years. And I think we've seen some inroads because of that communication and action afterwards.
Now, coming up this weekend, earliest starting on Friday, there's another event scheduled to try to keep that going, where faith leaders are set to meet in prayer with law enforcement. Now, Sheriff, why do you think it's so important for this dialogue to unfold and engage in the community? I know you're scheduled to attend that event. Why have that a platform to talk?
Well, it's hoped that with the faith community, and really hoping that it's all faiths that are involved down there, and hopefully the faith leaders have a little bit of a pulse of what's going on in their communities and can encourage all walks of life, whether they have a faith or don't have a faith, but to know the community, to get them involved in this dialogue and communication and effort. Again, I hesitate to always say communication, because communication is great, but we really need action to follow through with that.
And do you think that the reason the communication has been peaceful is because of this sense of community that at least we do share here in Chautauqua County and in the Jamestown area? You see it all the time, God forbid someone has a horrible house fire and they lose everything. Everybody comes together to try to support in a way. And even in this time where we see this unrest nationwide, here we've been able to have events like Sunday where people have that dialogue, call for that action, and they do it without flipping cars and destroying homes.
Well, you mentioned Chautauqua County is a great place, a community that sticks together and is willing to reach out to assist each other. in time of need. And unfortunately, with what's going on right now, it sometimes does take a tragedy to motivate and move people. And this is something that we should be doing year round and not waiting. We should be proactive in our activities.
And finally, Sheriff, we thank you for joining us today. What is your overall message that you want the community to know about policing here locally and its relationship, and what steps you want to take going forward?
One of the big things that was brought up is community policing. We talked about that on Sunday, and it's something that we need to continue to do. In law enforcement, we have to get out into the community, which means sometimes getting out of our cars, going into public places, going into the parks, talking to people, listening to them. Sometimes we do too much talking, not enough listening. I come upon a quote from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that I hadn't seen before or heard before, but I think it's rather fitting. It says, "We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." And we are a community, and when we see the senseless treatment that happened in Minnesota, we have to defeat that and be willing to stand up and say that is wrong. And I think any officer I've talked to in this area has expressed that those actions were, just inexcusable, and it should not have happened.
All right, Chautauqua County Sheriff Jim Quattrone joining us on the program today. Sheriff, great conversation. We appreciate you being here.
Thank you.